I'm David Griffin. It's the 3rd of August 2018. I'm here at Derbyshire County Cricket Club and I'm talking with
John Brown.
John, thank you once again for joining us part of this heritage project. And we've talked in previous interviews about your formative years as a cricketer, as an umpire, as a scorer. We've talked about your military service and also your teaching career. But we've reached the point now where we're at the turn of the century and you've made your scoring debut for Warwickshire down at Maidstone against Kent. And I think you said in the last interview your expectations at that time were that you would fill in at Warwickshire, but then you managed to get the job here at Derbyshire. So what was the preparation and lead-in time for when you actually started scoring at Derbyshire, between getting the job and when you began your first game?
I can remember the date because it was St Valentine's Day, and since I was in love with cricket that seemed quite appropriate. That was in the year 2000 that I was appointed, and I can remember it was like a kid at Christmas waiting for the beginning of the season because I was so excited about having this new job. And I didn't really do very much in the way of preparation. I had already joined Stan quite often in the previous season and done the laptop for him, and he was very pleased to be able to be relieved of that occasionally. So I had learnt what was necessary on the laptop, which in those days wasn't the current programs that are being used, neither Total Cricket Scorer nor the Professional Cricket Scorer, which is being introduced this year, but it was the one that was run by the PA, the Press Association. It was their own program, and we were linked direct to them.
So that's interesting. So I was going to ask you what were the tools of the trade. Obviously, when you started scoring back as a boy in the 1940s, 50s, it was a pencil and a book.
Very much so.
So by the time you begin to do first class cricket, it's a laptop, but also a book as well.
Yes. Well, it didn't have to be a book, although Derbyshire have always had a book, but every county scorer does a written version of the score as well. It is a help. It helps to concentrate the mind. So yes, and obviously having done quite a lot of work on becoming what was called an advanced scorer and on teaching other scorers, I knew pretty well what was required. And
I'm interested to know, John, that you mentioned there about the training and advanced scorers. What is the gap between the person who sits and scores tomorrow, we're sitting here on a Friday, tomorrow it's league cricket, so the average league cricket scorer that's scoring tomorrow, what's the difference between what they're doing and what you do at first class level?
it is very similar, obviously, but relationship with umpires is very different. They are much more appreciative of what we are doing at first class level than the majority of umpires at club level. They think they're only the scorers, but here we are genuine colleagues, and they do rely on us for quite a lot of things, like how many balls to go in the over and that sort of thing.
Can I just pick you? I'll ask you about that because I want to go back in a minute to your debut, so I won't forget. But I notice occasionally when I'm looking on Cricket Archive, sometimes you'll see at the bottom under the notes on a match, it'll say X was a 5-ball over or Y was a 7-ball over.
Right.
Now that presumably is something that the scorers have noted, but you've just said that sometimes the umpires will talk to you about that. So are you allowed to say to an umpire, after 5 balls have been bowled as they walk off to square leg, that they've, or you might not be able to answer this question, but I mean, is that relationship exist where you can correct them?
It has happened this year, I think for the first time, when more than one umpire has said before the game starts, if you think we are miscounting, let us know.
Okay.
And I suspect that that's probably come from Chris Kelly at Lords, that they are to ask. But the chap who comes in from Opta is instructed to notify somebody when there is an incorrect number. We have had one this year when I intervened and said, we make that over, and has there been a wide or a no ball? And there hadn't, and the umpire at the bowler's end said to his square leg colleague, because you know they always signal to each other when these days there's 2 balls to go, do you make that over? No. was the answer from square leg. So a 7th ball was bowled.
Right.
And the next morning I went into the umpires and said, do we get any time allowance for the 7-ball over? And there wasn't a 7-ball over. And I said, it's on film.
Of course. Yeah.
And they just went quiet.
Yeah, of course.
And they didn't give us any allowance. I won't say the name of the umpire.
No, indeed. Go back then, as I said I would, to 2000 and your debut. What was your first game then, John?
We had a championship game against Leicestershire here, and it was rained off all round the country on the first day, and we were the first team to start on the second day. I think there were either 4 or 5 championship matches due to start that day, so I can actually say that I was the scorer at home, therefore on the laptop, who scored the very first ball in the first division. And so that's something that can go on my gravestone.
And of course you've been in various, I'm just talking about Derby now,
Yeah.
been in various locations. So where did you start on that particular game, 2000?
That one we were on the top of the T-bar as it is now,
Yeah.
so we scored from there. I remember once we did have a warm-up game and the umpire didn't know where we were and he was signalling to the changing rooms and someone must have waved back.
Yeah.
And I was scoring on my own. We were supposed to be playing against Yorkshire and they hadn't brought a scorer with them, so I was on my own. And the umpire had started the game and I was still busily doing what I had to do on my laptop in the scorebook and hadn't even noticed that the play had started. So the first over had gone without me seeing anything. So that was quite
It's
interesting.
interesting you mentioned the pavilion because of course where the laundry room is in the pavilion, that's facing the pitch, that's where the scorers went.
Yes.
When the pavilion opened, I remember one day in the 80s there was a band, literally a marching band were playing in quite what they were doing in the pavilion, I don't know. Whilst the game was on, and Stan Tacey said this is just intolerable, we can't stay here.
Right.
And then I think they moved to the old, what is now the old scoreboard rather than the old scoreboard, didn't they? But then presumably you moved from the T-bar to
Then,
next door to what was the old scoreboard but became the press box. Was that your next move?
No, we went to the building that's been knocked down, the starters.
Oh, of course you did, the PA.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
we
right.
stayed
yes,
there for
yes, of
quite
course,
a while.
yes.
So that was my second.
So none of these are a good view, are they, really, of
Not
the ideal view?
being up and down the pitch is
Yeah.
so much better. Well,
Yeah.
just as a cricket lover, that's the best place to be able to see, is it turning, is it swinging?
Mm.
But you go to Lords, you're deep mid-wicket,
Absolutely.
very high up, and you can still enjoy it. But
What have been the most challenging venues to score at, Joe?
Worcester I find awkward because it's got pillars between you and what is actually happening out in the middle. It's a beautiful ground, and I think they've made it less beautiful by putting lots of stands up. But that's quite a difficult one.
What about the outgrounds?
There was one at Loughborough once when it was a warm-up game before the game started. I have got a photograph somewhere, I think it may be in my room, where you couldn't see the stumps at one end, therefore you couldn't see the umpire at that end. And it was actually Annette Owen, female umpire,
Oh, yes, we've
who was
interviewed
scoring
Annette.
the game,
Yeah.
and she had to walk about 10 yards each time she wanted to signal so that she could be in an eye line with where I was sitting. So that was a very tricky
It's
one.
interesting you say that because I was sat at the Bennett end taking photographs of the T20 game at Leicester the other week, and there's actually a position there, and indeed if you're on the field, if you're playing, Alex Hughes was filming at long off, where if you turn to your left and turn to your right, there's a scoreboard in both locations, but you can't actually see the score because they put a floodlight pylon in
Right.
front of both scoreboards,
Yeah.
which I'm sure they're planning. But not being able to see the umpire when you're a scorer, I suppose, is a slight disadvantage to say the least. What about the little outgrounds and because I know you've done a fair few, I think in places like Guildford and Southport and
Yeah, I
Chesterfield, of
think,
course.
I think of Leek. That's got a tiny little window at the front. You can't possibly have a third person in there as we have to these days. The outgrounds, I always enjoy, I look at the fixtures at the beginning of each season, where am I going that I've not been to before? And I think that this is probably the first year I've not been to one, or am I forgetting somewhere? Or there was one that was, but we didn't play.
Wheatwood.
At
Yes.
the University of Leeds.
And it looked all right, that did actually.
Yes.
Nice pavilion behind the bowlers.
Quite a nice scorer's position, I think,
Yeah. So, you look at the art of scoring, or the skill of scoring, or the business of scoring. How do you, I mean, what is the, we talked in a previous interview about it focuses your mind on the game. But how do you, is that a challenge in itself for 600 balls a day in a championship match, or in a T20 when the ball is flying to all parts? Because you're not just watching the ball, are you? You've actually then got to write something down, you've then got to input something into a computer, and then the scoreboard as well.
The scoreboard is...
lots of things. So just talk me through a delivery then. What do you have to do for each ball, if assuming it's a single scored off it?
Right. I have stopped doing something that I did for most of the time, which was to say where the scoring shot was hit.
Right.
I have decided there's no need for that, although it has been nice in the past to have done printouts for people making their first century, for example.
That's like a wagon wheel, I think.
Yes, that's right. But so, bowler runs up, you watch him, you if it's a no ball or a wide, and you hope that the umpire signals immediately. They don't all, even at first class level, even though it says signal as soon as you can. So it's a fair delivery, batsman plays it, it's gone off a thick edge down to third man, say. You are pretty certain it's going to be a one, and you say one to Hughes, click the one on the laptop, put the one against the bowler's name in the bowling analysis, against the batsman's name.
So the one for Hughes, is that a confirmation to your colleague that's scoring?
Yeah.
And is there a convention about who says that?
No, you don't always say it.
Right.
But quite often you do, and very often you say which ball it was. So that's, in fact, rather than saying to Hughes, you're more likely to say one off the third.
Right.
To make sure that you haven't missed the second ball, or that you haven't put in a dot by mistake, and you're doing it, and they will always come back and say, no, I make that the second, or whatever.
Has it ever gone wrong, John? Because I remember scoring a test match once at Trent Bridge, 1978, England, New Zealand. And the reason I did it was because the old Trent Bridge scoreboard was the best scoreboard in the world, because you got the up-to-date bowling analysis on it, so you could, But the number of times I was pulling my hair out, I was only a teenager, but because things didn't add up, and I'd be scribbling bits trying to add things. I mean, does it ever happen like that? Do you ever have the situation where you've lost a run, or you're looking at the board and thinking there's something's not adding up here?
Yes, well, quite often we will say, do you make the score what it is on the scoreboard? Because you make it different. That's obviously here, my laptop links with the scoreboard, so my laptop is going to show what's on the board.
Right.
And if I've put a 2 instead of a 3 or something like that, it will show on the board, and my colleague will, I hope, quite quickly point out that you didn't enter a 3 there, as you should have done. That rarely happens, but it does happen that we miss changing a bowler. I say, Riaz has come back. I tell my colleague that, I change it in the book, but I forget to do it on the laptop.
Right.
And then you realise, are you sure at the end of the over, it says, are you sure you want Riaz to bowl 2 consecutive overs? And I have to tell the scoreboard, laptop, yes, I do, because I can then go back and correct it.
Right, yeah.
And that sort of thing does happen. But there is much, much more to it, certainly at this level when you're responsible for the board as well, than people realise. And 2020 is a nightmare.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I'm drained at the end of a 2020 much more than having done 7 hours first class proper cricket.
And you mentioned Opta earlier, and you can perhaps explain to us, you talked about PA, the Press Association.
Yeah.
So that was back in the day when you would do the scoreboard, and PA, that's what you'd see on CFAX or teletext.
Yes. It updated
essentially,
everything.
yeah. Whereas now we've got Opta. Now Opta are, perhaps you just explained, he's the third scorer effectively in every box.
Yes.
So how did that come about, and what's their role?
Yes, there isn't always room for them to sit in the same box. For example, Northampton, you'll know the Opta chap is in the same place as the press people. And it happens at Trent Bridge as well, where he sits at the far end of the ground, away from us, but he's on walkie-talkie, if necessary. That came in because they offered their services, I think, to ECB. They are the people who, in other sports, will tell you that Manchester United have had 47% of the possession, yes. Yeah. And the same in tennis. They're the ones that tell you how many shots have gone in on this side, and etc.
So it's data collection. And
yes, it's that really. Much more than we do. They do have to give information that we don't have, like the direction of the ball, the length of the ball, who fielded it. It's very complex for them, but the majority of them are very good.
And is that useful to you to have that third?
Very occasionally.
Right.
It's not useful at Chelmsford. The chap there thinks he's more important than the two scorers, and you wonder why you're there. But the people I've had here have been very, very good. They speak when they're spoken to, or they know when to chip in. They might just occasionally say he signalled no ball or something like that when neither of the scorers had noticed, partly because the umpire didn't signal at the moment of delivery. That does happen.
So. And what about the advent of things like Duckworth Lewis and DLS and all these kind of things? I mean, presumably you have a role to do that. I know you do, because I've seen you hand out the printouts, but that's something that the scorers are responsible for?
Not really. In practice, it does happen that I do it here, but there is supposed to be someone else who is known as the match manager, who is responsible for Duckworth Lewis. Yes, I've been through it all, the theory side of things. I went on a 2-hour course on the theory, but in practice we have a very good program on the laptop, and we just feed in the information. Like the other day we lost an over, I think, because of rain, and so the target is there were 1.1 overs to go, and it rained, and it turned out to be a 19 over game, and we had to go out and bowl the other 1.1 overs. So the other team also were going to have 19 overs, but the target was going to be slightly more than the first team had done.
It was the Notts game here, wasn't it?
Yes, but I do approve of Duckworth Lewis, because I think it's by far the best system that has ever been thought of.
I was going to ask you, it's not perfect, but when you recall, I remember a game at Chesterfield, I'm sure it was, when one side made 80 for 1 off 20 overs in a John Player League match, and then it rained. And then they said, right, okay, I think it became a 5-over game for the side that was chasing. They just needed 4 and over.
Yeah.
They did 20 off 5 overs. You think, well, that can't be fair, because 80 for 1 off 20 would have surely become 200 off 40. You know, it is a better system.
I can remember that in Australia they had the stupid idea of taking off the best overs for the bowling side. Yeah. So if they bowled 7 maidens in 50 overs, the second team batting had to get the same number of runs in 43 overs. Yeah.
They tried. I think that they've probably got the best method. John, what I want to do is to go through your kind of career highlights really at Derbyshire, but I've run out of time for now. So what we'll do is we'll just pause there, and we'll have another 20 minutes talking about Derbyshire cricket in a minute. Thanks for now.
Righto.